I am 67 years old, and just a few months ago, my own son pushed me off a cliff. The world thinks I survived by miracle, but the truth is far more terrifying. It was not the fall that broke me. It was what I heard afterward when my son leaned over my hospital bed and whispered his confession into my dying ear. The cliff did not kill me, but my son's words did. People ask me sometimes if I remember the sound of the wind as I fell, if I recall the cold slap of the air against my face. I do. But what I remember even more clearly is the silence that followed, the heavy silence of betrayal that no scream can pierce. Imagine raising a child, with every ounce of love inside you, feeding him, sheltering him, teaching him to stand on his own 2 feet, only to discover, decades later, that his strongest wish is to see you buried. Imagine looking into the eyes you once kissed goodnight and realizing those same eyes are watching you tumble into death. My name is Arthur, and I never thought I would live long enough to speak these words aloud. I thought my story would end on that cliff, my body shattered on the rocks below, my voice silenced forever, but life, in its cruel way, kept me alive enough to hear the truth that destroyed me. I often wonder what hurts more, the thought that your life might end in an instant, or the realization that your own blood has been plotting your death for years. If you believe the second is worse, you already understand my torment. And if you are still unsure, stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will know. On that day, my son stood behind me with the same casual stance he had used since childhood, the same posture I had seen when he was a boy hiding mischief. But there was nothing playful about the way he placed his hands on my back. There was nothing innocent in the gentle push that sent me stumbling forward. He timed it perfectly. One wrong step, one patch of loose rock, and gravity did the rest. I remember Henry, my late wife's brother, screaming in the distance. I remember my son's wife gasping, pretending to be horrified, her hands over her mouth like an actress rehearsing her lines. But mostly I remember my son's face, calm, focused, almost relieved. When I hit the ground, something inside me gave way. Bones cracked, blood filled my mouth. My chest heaved with the desperate struggle to breathe. I thought that was the end. I thought death had come to claim me, and perhaps in a way it did. Because even though my body clung to life, the moment I heard my son confess the man I had been, died right there. I lay in the hospital machines, buzzing nurses rushing, and in the haze of morphine and agony, I felt a presence by my bed. My son leaned in close, his voice low, his breath hot against my ear. "It's over, old man," he said. "Richard was right. You should have given it all to him. But he's gone now, and soon you will be too." I made sure of that. My pulse spiked. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to remain still, as though I hadn't heard. He believed I was unconscious. He believed he was speaking into the void, but I heard every word, and those words cut deeper than any fall could. Do you know what it is to feel your heart shatter, not from impact, but from revelation? To realize that the child you loved more than yourself had not only betrayed you, but had killed his own brother decades before, and carried that secret like a trophy. That is what I heard in that whisper, and it was then I understood the truth. The cliff was not my executioner. My son was. The rocks bruised my body, but his words buried my soul. So I must ask you, the one listening, now would you rather die quickly in an accident or live long enough to learn that your own child plotted your murder? Which pain would you choose if you had no other choice? Think carefully, because one day, your trust may be tested too. Comment 1 if you believe that betrayal from family is worse than death itself. Before the fall, before the whisper that tore my world apart, there was a time when I believed my family was the safest place on earth. My name is Arthur, and I was not always a broken man staring at the ruins of my own bloodline. Once I was a father who thought love was enough to protect us all. I was a husband, a worker, a man who built a life from scratch with nothing but calloused hands and endless devotion. If you had asked me 30 years ago what my greatest achievement was, I would have answered without hesitation, my sons. I grew up poor, the kind of poor that makes every dollar sacred and every meal feel like a miracle. When I finally managed to buy a small house, it wasn't just wood and brick to me. It was proof that sacrifice meant something. In that house, I raised 2 boys with my wife Margaret until the cancer took her too soon. I became both father and mother, the cook, the teacher, the comforter, and the disciplinarian. I would stumble through long shifts at the carpentry shop, then come home to read bedtime stories with splinters still buried in my palms. I thought if I gave them enough love, enough guidance, they would grow into men who would carry our family's name with pride. Richard, my firstborn, was everything a father could ask for. He had his mother's eyes bright and curious, and a heart that seemed incapable of cruelty. He was the one who stayed late in the workshop with me sanding wood until his fingers ached, telling me about his dreams of building bridges and towers, things that would stand long after we were gone. He wanted to study engineering, and I knew he would have made a fine one. He laughed easily, forgave quickly, and treated me less like a burden and more like a partner. When Margaret passed, he stepped in without being asked, protecting his younger brother, carrying some of the weight that should never have been his to bear. Then there was Damien, 5 years younger, my second son. Where Richard was open, Damien was guarded. Where Richard looked outward to the world, Damien seemed to look inward as though he carried storms no one could see. He wasn't cruel, not at first. He was quieter, more reserved, the boy who would sit at the table, picking at his food, while his brother filled the air with stories. I told myself it was just his nature that every child blooms in a different way. I kissed him goodnight with the same tenderness, encouraged his small achievements with the same pride. I never wanted either of them to feel less loved. Sundays were my favorite. After church, we would gather round the oak table I built with my own hands. The smell of roast chicken would fill the house. Richard would chatter about school, and Damien would listen in silence. Sometimes I would catch him staring at his brother, his jaw clenched, his fork pressed tight in his hand. I mistook it for admiration, maybe envy at most. I never allowed myself to see the darker possibility. Love blinds you that way. It paints over cracks with bright colors until you can no longer tell if the structure beneath is crumbling. We had simple dreams. Margaret and I used to sit on the porch at night after the boys were asleep, whispering about our future. We planned to travel once the boys were grown to see the ocean for the first time, to build a smaller house where we could grow old together. Life was not glamorous, but it was ours, and I believed we were rich in the ways that mattered most. Even after her death, I clung to that belief. I told myself our boys were my anchor, that raising them well would keep her spirit alive. When Richard turned 20, something shifted. He and Damien argued more often, whispers behind closed doors, silences that grew heavy when I entered the room. I tried to dismiss it as the natural tension between brothers. Richard was ambitious, Damien more hesitant, and friction was inevitable. Still at night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was building under my own roof. My wife used to say I worried too much, but after she was gone, worry was all I had left. I look back now at those years, and it feels like I was living inside a painting. The colors were warm, the strokes delicate, but beneath the canvas, something poisonous was seeping through. The table where we shared meals, the workshop where I taught them how to shape wood, the yard where we planted flowers, each memory carries a shadow now. Because every detail that once felt like proof of love now feels like evidence that I was blind. Do you know what it's like to replay moments in your head, realizing the smiles were not as real as you thought? That the silences were not empty, but filled with hidden resentments? I think of Damien's eyes across the table, and I shiver. How did I not see it then? Was I too busy holding the family together to notice that one part of it was already breaking away? There is a cruel irony in memory. It warms you with the illusion of safety, even as it reminds you of the danger you ignored. I loved my sons, both of them, and I believed that love was unbreakable. That belief was my greatest strength, and as it turns out, my greatest weakness. Because love made me blind. If you've ever looked back on your life and realized the moments you thought were safe were actually warnings, then you know the kind of ache I carry. It is the ache of a man who remembers laughter, but now hears only echoes of lies. It is the ache of a father who thought his children would protect him, not push him toward the grave. And it is the ache of someone who knows that every happy memory is forever poisoned by the knowledge of what came next. Tell me, have you ever felt nostalgia twist into pain? If you have, type yes in the comments so I'll know I'm not the only one. Looking back, the signs were there long before the cliff, long before the whisper at my bedside. They weren't obvious at first. They never are. They came as tiny fractures in the glass of our family, easy to dismiss, easy to overlook, until one day the cracks spread and the whole thing shattered in my hands. It began with small disappearances, money missing from my wallet, withdrawals from the bank that I couldn't explain. At first I thought I was forgetful. I was in my 60s after all, and age makes you doubt yourself. But then I started to notice patterns. Every time Damien came by to visit, a bill would vanish, a transaction would show up in my account. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself he must have borrowed it and forgotten to mention it. I told myself anything except the truth that my own son might be stealing from me. The questions grew louder in my head when I found him in my study late one night, rifling through drawers he had no business opening. He jumped when I walked in, shoved papers back, and mumbled something about looking for a photo album. His hands shook. I laughed it off because I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew those weren't the movements of a man searching for pictures. They were the hands of someone searching for leverage, for documents, for keys to a future that didn't belong to him. There were other things too. The way he spoke of money as though it were the only measure of a man's worth. The way his eyes lingered too long on the insurance papers pinned to the bulletin board, his lips pressed thin in thought. He began visiting more often, but not with warmth or care. His questions were sharp, surgical, digging into my will, my savings, my property. "What happens to the house if something happens to you?" he asked, once his tone casual but his eyes too intent. I laughed nervously, told him he shouldn't be worrying about such things. He smiled, but it was not a son's smile. It was the smile of a man measuring the distance between himself and inheritance. Meals became strained. Where once there had been laughter and the easy chatter of family, now there was tension. He pushed food around his plate, avoided my gaze, and when I caught him looking at me, it wasn't affection I saw. It was calculation. I can't explain it better than that. It was as though I had become less a father and more an obstacle. There were phone calls too. I would pass by his room when he stayed the night and hear his voice low, urgent words like policy documents and soon. When I knocked, the calls always ended abruptly. He claimed it was work or a friend, but the excuses grew thinner each time. I started to lie awake at night, wondering who he was speaking to, what promises he was making in the dark. I tried to confront him gently once. "Damien, is everything all right?" "You seem troubled," I asked. He looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Dad," he said, "you worry too much." But even as he spoke, his hand clenched tight around his glass of water knuckles, white as though holding back something unsaid. It is strange how love blinds you. If a stranger had shown me these signs, I would have seen the danger instantly. But when it is your own son, you rewrite the truth to protect yourself. You call it stress, you call it bad luck. You call it anything except what it is. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the person you love most in the world could become the person who wants you gone. The last straw came when he suggested we update my will. He brought it up as though it were practical, thoughtful even. "It's just good planning," he insisted, sliding the papers across the table. But I could feel his eyes drilling into me as I read, and for the first time, I felt genuine fear sitting across from my own flesh and blood. That fear was like a knife twisting in my chest. Because it wasn't just the paperwork, it was the hunger in his gaze, the eagerness he couldn't quite disguise. I signed nothing that night, but the seed of dread was planted. I began to avoid him, to keep my documents locked, to double-check the locks on my doors. I hated myself for it. No father wants to look at his son and see a threat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the boy I once cradled in my arms had grown into something dangerous. So, I ask you, listening to this, now have you ever felt that sickening doubt about someone you love? That creeping suspicion you push aside because the truth is too painful? Have you ever convinced yourself that your instincts were wrong, only to regret it later? If you've ever ignored a red flag because love blinded you, comment 8, so I'll know you understand the mistake that almost cost me my life. The night I first heard the truth, it came like a crack of thunder splitting through the calm. For years I had ignored the signs, explained away the red flags, told myself my love was stronger than suspicion. But love cannot silence a whisper spoken in the dark. That whisper became the knife that sliced open a wound I had buried for decades. It was late, close to midnight, when I woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. My house is old. The floorboards creak under every weight, and I knew immediately that someone was moving where they shouldn't be. I pulled on my robe and made my way quietly down the staircase. In the living room, the lights were off, but the faint glow of a phone screen lit Damien's face. He wasn't alone. He was on the phone with someone, his voice low, his tone sharp. Nothing like the polite mask he wore in front of me. "I've waited long enough," he hissed into the receiver. "The old man's stubborn, but once he's gone, everything falls to me. He can't live forever, and I'm not letting Richard's ghost keep me from what's mine." Richard's ghost. My heart froze in my chest. I stood in the shadows, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. What did he mean Richard had been dead for 25 years, taken from us in a tragic accident on a hunting trip? He slipped, the coroner said. He hit his head on the rocks, they told me. I had mourned my firstborn until my soul ached, and now, hearing Damien's words, I felt the earth shift beneath me. The silence stretched as the person on the other end of the line muttered something I couldn't hear. Then Damien spoke again, more chilling than before. Yes, I handled Richard. He always thought he was better than me, but one wrong step was all it took. Now the old man stands in my way, and this time I won't leave it to chance. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. I gripped the banister to keep from collapsing. My son, my blood admitting to the unthinkable. The accident that had haunted me for a quarter of a century wasn't an accident at all. My younger son had murdered my firstborn, his own brother, and carried that secret like a shadow in his heart all these years. Do you know what it's like to feel your entire history collapse in an instant? Every memory I had of that day, the frantic call from the sheriff, the drive to the cliffside, the sight of Richard's lifeless body suddenly warped. In that moment, grief transformed into betrayal. I hadn't just lost my son. I had been deceived, manipulated, kept in the dark, while the murderer sat at my table, shared my meals, smiled at me as though nothing were wrong. I wanted to burst into the room, to grab him by the shoulders and demand the truth. But fear glued my feet to the floor. He thought I was asleep, thought his secret was safe. I stayed hidden in the shadows, trembling as his words burned into me. He ended the call with a promise that chilled me deeper than the night air. The cliff worked once, he whispered, and it'll work again. The phone clicked, the room went dark, and Damien walked past me without ever knowing I was there. I remained frozen on the staircase long after he was gone, my mind spinning, my body shaking with the weight of what I had heard. My son had killed his brother, and now he was planning to kill me. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing Damien's voice over and over in my head. I handled Richard. Over and over. Until it was no longer just a sentence, it was a death knell. The next morning I looked at my son across the breakfast table. His hands were steady as he lifted his coffee, his smile practiced and polite. But I saw the darkness beneath it now. I saw the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own child. I kept his secret though it burned me alive. Who would believe me if I told them? Who would stand with an old man against his own flesh and blood? The world saw Damien as a dutiful son, visiting his widowed father, helping with chores, asking about his health. No one saw the hunger behind his eyes. No one heard the whispers in the night. I carried the weight of that truth like a stone in my chest, waiting for the day it would crush me completely. And deep down, I knew that day was coming, sooner than I wanted to admit. So I ask you, if you were in my place, would you confront him and risk being silenced forever? Or would you stay quiet and pray for a miracle? Which choice would you make if your child's secret was a matter of life and death? Comment. Okay, if you believe silence can sometimes save a life, even when the truth screams to be spoken. From the moment I overheard Damien's late-night confession, the air in my house grew heavier. Every morning felt like waking up under a cloud that refused to pass a storm that gathered strength in silence. My son's footsteps no longer sounded like family. They sounded like fate closing in. He wasn't just visiting anymore, he was watching, circling, tightening his grip around my life. The first blow came in the form of papers. "Dad," he said one afternoon, laying a neat stack of documents on the kitchen table. "It's time we make things official. You're not getting any younger. What happens if something happens to you tomorrow? You don't want me scrambling through your affairs, do you?" His words carried the tone of care, but his eyes told another story. They were cold, calculating, already measuring the value of my house, my land, the small nest egg I had built after years of work. I had seen those eyes before, but never so clearly eyes that had watched Richard fall to his death. I pretended to read the papers, though the words blurred before me. A power of attorney, he called it. With one signature, I would give him control of my finances, my property, my entire existence. It's just precaution, he insisted. All families do this. But it wasn't precaution, it was a noose. I pushed the papers back toward him with trembling hands. "Not today," I said. "I need time to think." The smile he gave me was thin, stretched too tight over teeth that clenched with impatience. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need. I'll bring them back tomorrow." And he did. Every day after that, he returned with those papers pushing, coaxing, sometimes even scolding, like I was a child, refusing his medicine. "You're being stubborn," he snapped one evening. "Why make things harder than they have to be?" Melissa played her part beautifully. She would sit beside me, her hand warm on mine, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just want to make sure you're safe," she cooed. "You know we love you, don't you?" Her touch felt like poison, her love like a trap. I tried to resist, but resistance has a cost. The more I pushed back, the more Damien pushed harder. He began showing up unannounced, walking through my house as if he already owned it. He opened drawers, checked bills, commented on what he called wasteful expenses. I felt stripped in my own home, my dignity chipped away piece by piece. One night as we cleared the dinner table, I found myself whispering to the empty chair across from me, "Richard, if you can hear me, forgive me. I didn't protect you. I didn't see what your brother had become, and now he's coming for me." The days blurred into weeks, each one heavier than the last. My sleep was shattered by nightmares, Damien's voice, Richard's scream, the sound of rocks giving way. In waking hours, the fear didn't fade. It only grew sharper. Then came the suggestion that turned fear into certainty. "Dad," Damien said, with that false smile I had grown to despise, "you've been cooped up too long. Melissa and I thought it'd be nice to take you on a trip. Just a simple hike, nothing too hard. Fresh air, beautiful views, family time. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" Wonderful. That word echoed like a death sentence. I saw the plan as clear as daylight. A hike, a cliff, an accident. The same stage where Richard's life had ended was being prepared for me. I tried to stall. "My knees aren't what they used to be," I said. "I don't think I could handle it." Melissa leaned closer, her perfume sharp in my nose. "That's why we picked an easy trail," she said. "Even children could walk it. We'll take care of you every step of the way." Take care of me. I nearly laughed at the cruelty of it. That night I sat alone in my room, staring at the walls that had seen a lifetime of memories. I thought of my wife, gone these many years, and wondered if she would blame me for raising a son capable of such betrayal. I thought of Richard, whose laughter once filled these halls, and how his ghost seemed to watch me from every shadow. And I thought of Damien, my surviving son, who now looked at me not with love, but with hunger. The pressure grew unbearable. Some days I caught him staring at me for too long, his eyes calculating, his jaw tight. Other days, he turned soft, speaking of how he wanted me to live out my days in peace, how he would handle everything for me. But whether harsh or tender, the message was the same. He wanted control, and he wouldn't stop until he had it. I began leaving notes hidden in the house, letters for neighbors, for Harriet, for anyone who might find them if I didn't return. I wrote of Richard, of Damien's confessions, of the plan I feared was unfolding. Each word was a lifeline, proof that I wasn't blind, that I hadn't gone quietly. The night before the trip, I barely slept. Damien had called to confirm, his voice dripping with cheer. "It'll be a day to remember, Dad. Just wait and see." I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers he had left once again. Power of attorney, will, insurance policies. He wanted everything in writing before the hike. I didn't sign them. Instead, I folded them neatly and locked them in the drawer with my letters. If the cliff took me, maybe the truth locked inside, that drawer would find its way out. When the morning came, I looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back was tired, lined with years of loss, but there was something else too, a flicker of resolve. Damien thought I was weak, that my silence meant surrender. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is the trap. So, when he knocked at the door, bright and smiling, with Melissa by his side, I forced my own smile in return. "I'm ready," I said, though. My hands trembled. And, as I stepped into his car, I told myself one thing. If this was to be the end, it would not be the quiet one he expected. But I have to ask you, if your own child invited you on a hike you knew was meant to kill you, would you still go? Or would you run comment 8 if you'd go to face your fate? Or like if you'd run and never look back? The morning of the hike broke with a sky too clear, too calm, as if mocking the storm brewing inside me. Damien pulled up to my house, whistling the same carefree tune he used to hum as a boy. But now it sounded like a funeral march. Melissa stepped out of the passenger side with a brightness that felt like poison, her arms full of snacks and water bottles. "For our adventure," she said cheerfully, pressing them into my hands. Her smile never reached her eyes. I locked my door, slowly letting my fingers linger on the handle. This might be the last time I touched the home I built with my wife, the place where Richard once laughed, where birthdays and anniversaries filled the air with warmth. Today those walls felt like tombstones. The car ride was suffocating. Damien drove with practiced calm, his hands steady on the wheel, his posture perfect. Melissa controlled the radio, singing softly to tunes that clashed with the dread pulsing in my chest. Every bump in the road rattled my bones. I sat stiff in the back seat, my palms sweating, every nerve on high alert. Damien occasionally glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't name, but knew too well: anticipation. After 2 hours, the car rolled to a stop at the trailhead. The mountain rose before us, tall and indifferent, its rocky face scarred by time and weather. The place was beautiful, in a cruel way, nature's perfect stage for tragedy. Melissa bounded out first, snapping photos of the trees, the wildflowers, even the sign at the start of the trail. Memories, she chirped. Damien came around to my side and opened the door with exaggerated courtesy. "Ready, Dad." His voice was smooth, but underneath I heard the steel edge of something darker. I forced myself to nod. My legs felt heavy as I stepped onto the dirt path. Each footfall echoed like a drumbeat, counting down to the inevitable. The trail began gently weaving through tall pines. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappled patterns on the ground. Melissa stayed ahead, pointing out birds and snapping endless photos. She laughed too loudly, too often, the sound brittle as glass. Damien walked just behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence like a shadow pressing down on me. "How's the pace, Dad?" he asked more than once. "Need to rest." His voice was coated in false concern, but every word felt like a test. He wanted me tired. He wanted me weak. An hour and my breath grew shallow, my knees protesting each incline. I could feel sweat soaking my shirt, Damien noticed. "We're almost at the lookout," he said. But I remembered the map he'd shown me. It should have been much longer. His lie confirmed what I already knew. The lookout he spoke of wasn't the real one. It was the place he had chosen. Melissa stopped suddenly, her finger pointing toward a jagged path that veered off the main trail. "Look at that formation," she exclaimed. "The view must be incredible. Let's go up there for some special photos." My blood ran cold. The formation she pointed to was a cliff, narrow, steep, with loose stones and a sheer drop into a gorge below. It was perfect. Too perfect. "I don't know if that's safe," I murmured, my voice trembling despite my best effort. "Nonsense," Damien said, already moving toward it. "I'll help you." There was no choice. Refusal would only buy me another plan, another stage, another chance for him to strike. So I followed step by agonizing step up the treacherous path. Rocks slipped under my boots, my knees ached, and my lungs burned. Melissa reached the top, first her camera clicking eagerly. Damien offered me his hand as I struggled with the last few feet. His grip was firm, almost too firm, pulling me onto the cliff as if guiding me to the gallows. The view was breathtaking: mountains rolling into the horizon, the river carving silver lines through the valley below. In another life, I might have marveled at it. Today it was nothing but the backdrop for my execution. "Stand over there," Melissa instructed, pointing dangerously close to the edge. "The light is perfect." I obeyed, my body trembling as I felt the emptiness of the gorge yawning behind me. Damien positioned himself subtly, just a step behind, his posture casual but every muscle ready. "Smile," Melissa said. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were hard as stone. I forced a smile. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst. The shutter clicked once, twice, 3 times. "Take one more," Damien said, moving closer. "But step back just a little so the valley really fills the frame. One more step." That was all it would take. I looked at him, then straight into his eyes. For the first time in decades, I let him see the truth in mine, not fear, not confusion, but recognition. I knew what he had done to Richard. I knew what he wanted to do to me. And in that silent moment, something inside me shifted. I was no longer just a trembling old man at the mercy of his son. I was a father, betrayed a man with nothing left to lose. Melissa raised the camera. "This is the one," she said coldly. "The last one." Damien lunged, his hands pressed against my chest, ready to shove me into the abyss. But I was ready. With every ounce of strength left in my body, I grabbed his wrist and twisted, pulling him forward instead. "If I fall," I roared, "you're coming with me." The world exploded into chaos. Melissa screamed, dropping the camera. She rushed forward, clawing at my arms, trying to free Damien. Our bodies teetered on the edge, a grotesque dance with gravity. My boots slipped on loose stones, my knees buckled, but rage gave me strength. For a moment time slowed. I saw Richard's face, his smile, his laughter, his kindness. I saw my wife, her gentle hands, her faith in me. I saw Damien the boy. I once held the man, he had become the monster I had ignored for too long. And I knew this was the moment it all came to an end. The ground gave way. The three of us tumbled a tangle of limbs and screams, plummeting toward the jagged rocks below. Wind roared in my ears, my stomach lurched, and the world spun into chaos. The impact was brutal. Pain exploded through my body, a white-hot fire consuming everything. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I tasted blood metallic and bitter. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then through the ringing in my ears, I heard Damien groan. Melissa whimpered nearby, her voice trembling with pain and fury. And then I heard my own voice, weak but alive. Not yet, I whispered to myself. Not yet. Do you believe fate gives second chances, even at the edge of death? Comment. Yes. If you think survival is sometimes the sharpest revenge. When I opened my eyes again, the world was white and humming. The ceiling above me was blurred by the sting of fluorescent lights, and voices drifted around like echoes in a dream. For a terrifying moment, I thought I had died and awakened in some in-between place. But then the pain hit, sharp, searing, undeniable. I was alive. I tried to speak, but a mask covered my mouth, pumping air into my lungs. My body was wrapped in bandages, my ribs aching with every shallow breath. I turned my head slightly and saw another bed beside mine. Henry was there unconscious, but breathing, his chest rising and falling with effort. Relief and sorrow washed over me in equal measure. We had survived the fall, but at what cost? Footsteps approached. A nurse, young and sharp-eyed, leaned over me. Her name tag read, INS. She whispered so softly only I could hear, "Don't move. I know. I heard what your son said." Her words jolted me awake more than any medicine could. She had overheard Damien whispering by my bed when he thought I was unconscious, whispering about Richard, about money, about unfinished business. She knew. Someone else finally knew. Within hours, detectives arrived, led by a man named Johnson. He pulled up a chair, his face grave but determined. "Sir," he said, "we believe you've been the victim of an attempted homicide. Can you tell us what happened on that mountain?" My throat burned, but I forced the words out. I told him everything: Richard's death 25 years ago. Damien's late-night confession, the forged documents, the hike, the cliff, the struggle. I told him about Melissa's role, her sweet voice masking a heart full of calculation. And then I told him about Henry's phone tucked in his pocket, recording every word on that mountain. The detective's eyes lit up. If that recording is intact, it's the evidence we need. By God's grace, it was. When Henry finally stirred awake, weak but lucid, he handed over the phone with trembling hands. "Everything's in there," he rasped. "Every word." The police technicians listened. Melissa's chilling line. "Smile, this will be your last photo." Damien's hiss. The cliff worked once, it'll work again. Their plan, their performance, their obsession with inheritance, it was all captured. For the first time in decades, the truth about Richard's death had a voice. Damien and Melissa sat in the waiting room, weeping crocodile tears for the family they claimed to love. They told anyone who would listen about the terrible accident, about how bravely they had tried to save me. But when the detectives approached, their faces shifted. Damien Black, Melissa. Black Johnson said firmly, "You are under arrest for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Arthur Black." The words fell like thunder. Melissa gasped, her mask shattering. Damien shot to his feet, rage twisting his face. "That's impossible! They're dead! I saw them die!" His outburst was recorded, another nail in his coffin. Melissa turned on him, instantly screaming that it was his idea, his plan. He retaliated, spitting accusations back at her. Their alliance, so carefully crafted, dissolved in minutes under the weight of their own panic. From my hospital bed, I heard their voices echo down the hall. For the first time in 25 years, I allowed myself to close my eyes and breathe, not in fear, but in relief. Richard's ghost could finally rest. The trial came months later. I wheeled myself into the courtroom, my body weaker than before, but my spirit steady. Damien sat at the defense table, hollow-eyed, his arrogance stripped away. Melissa sat beside him, her face pale, her hands trembling. They avoided my gaze, but I stared at them until they squirmed. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke not just as a victim, but as a father who had carried a secret too long. I told the jury about Richard, the son, whose laughter once filled my home, whose dreams had been stolen by his own brother's jealousy. I told him about the lies, the manipulation, the decades of pretending. And then I looked directly at Damien. You thought my silence made me weak, I said. But my silence was a trap. Every lie you told, every mask you wore, only tightened the rope around your neck. You killed your brother, and you tried to kill me. Today, the truth kills the monster you became. The courtroom was silent, every ear straining, every heart heavy. Damien's face hardened, but there was no fire left in him. Melissa wept openly, begging the jury to believe she was just a pawn. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady, guilty on all counts. Murder, attempted murder, conspiracy. The judge sentenced them both to life in prison, without parole. And just like that, the nightmare ended. A year has passed since that day. My body carries the scars of the fall, my bones ache more than they used to. But I am still here. Richard is gone, Henry is gone, but I carry their memories like a torch. And most importantly, I have my grandchildren now. Damien and Melissa's children, innocent souls who will never know their parents' prison walls, who will instead grow up in a home where truth is honored and love is real. At night when I tuck them in, I tell them stories of Richard, the uncle they never knew. I tell them about his laughter, his dreams, his kindness. I make sure they know that betrayal did not win, that dignity survived, that the truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way back to the light. So here I am, an old man who walked to the edge of death and back telling you this story. Family can be your greatest treasure or your sharpest knife. My son thought he could bury the past, but he forgot one thing: you cannot bury truth. Truth always rises. And now I ask you, after everything you've heard, if your child betrayed you in the worst possible way, would you forgive them, or would you cut them out of your life forever? Comment 9, if you believe some betrayal should never be forgiven, or, if you believe forgiveness is always the stronger path.